So way back when, I made a video on my main channel called Night of the Living Dead MMOs, looking at discontinued MMOs that had been revived by their respective player bases after they were shut down. One of the games that I talked about was called City of Heroes, and there is a news story, not really, I guess it's sort of a news story, that I discovered while researching that video that has haunted me ever since, and I finally worked up the courage to actually talk about it because it's one of the it's one of the most upsetting things. So for a quick rundown for people who might not be familiar with City of Heroes, it was a superhero-themed MMO that launched around 2004, and it basically allowed players to create their own superhero or supervillain, and depending on which alignment you chose, you would be segregated into one of two cities, one for the heroes and one for the villains, and then you would do various heroic or villainous activities. There was, however, a third area that allowed players from both alignments, both cities, to mingle together, and this was a PvP area. And that's where our story begins, in a headline that reads, City of Heroes character Twixt becomes game's most hated outcast, courtesy of Loyola professor. So this whole article centers on a real person who might or might not still be working somewhere in education, and I'm gonna get very upset soon. I would like it if no one went and actually harassed him. No matter how much you want to, I need you to keep it on a leash. With that being said, the article begins with a description of a man named David Myers, a media professor at Loyola University. He is playing City of Heroes, and he plays a character named Twixt. He is in this PvP zone, and he decides to kill a opposing player. He is a hero, and he decides to kill a villain. And after killing this player, the player writes to him, if you kill me one more time, I will come and kill you for real, and I am not kidding. The article continues. The chilling text shook Myers 2 years ago. It served as a telling detail for his ongoing study of social customs in internet gaming communities. At the time of his clash with Cypherus, who's the other player, Myers was just 3 months into an in-depth behavioral study of the City of Heroes/villains online community. Already, someone had threatened to unearth his real identity and take his life. So, hearing that sounds like really unreasonable, and of course it's never okay to like threaten someone. I don't know. That kind of thing is uncalled for in I think in the most people would also agree in the realms of trash talk. So you kind of start this article sort of sympathizing with Myers and being like, oh, why, man, gamers are so toxic and mean, and that's probably what this whole behavioral study is about, right? Not so. So they sort of get into the culture of City of Heroes. You see, City of Heroes, the game, had a very friendly, tightly woven community. People generally were pretty chill, and naturally there were like bad apples here and there, but people generally like to just kind of hang out and be nice to each other. It was a decidedly untoxic community compared to certain other MMOs or online games. So in an ironic way, this PvP area where players from both sides could mingle together was actually used as more of a social hub where people would come together and regardless of their hero or villain status, be able to intermingle. In fact, later on in the game's lifespan, there were expansions that offered players the ability to change their alignment if they completed some quest lines and stuff, because I think the developers realized that segregating the player base like that was splitting their community unnecessarily from people who wanted to just play with each other. So usually people would just hang out in this PvP area and not fight, but just like chat and socialize. I'm sure that if you asked someone politely if they wanted to PvP, they would probably oblige if they also wanted to, and then you would just go off to the side, you know, just like, you can fight, just be cool about it. What Professor Myers did was not this at all. In fact, he basically just decided, well, we'll get it, let's read from the article. Myers, who bought City of Heroes when it hit store shelves in 2004, quickly learned that players ignored the area's stated purpose. Heroes chatted peacefully with villains in the combat zone. Instead of fighting each other, members of the two factions sparred with computer-controlled enemies. Myers sensed a research opening. He created Twixt, a scrappy, high-leaping hero decked out in different-colored spandex suits and rocket boots. He took his character to the virtual war zone and set out to simply battle villains. It then describes how he was actually pretty strong and maybe just had a really strong PvP build specifically, which meant that other players had difficulty taking him down. During the first few sessions, other players gently informed Twixt that his method of play was unwelcome, but Twixt kept on vanquishing villains. Mobs of villains then ambushed Twixt, hoping to defeat him so often that he would quit. Meanwhile, Twixt's fellow heroes watched without joining the fray. The article then describes a message board post that read, "I know how Twixt plays is considered legal, but this person is really getting out of hand. This guy has got to go." So, when just simply beating him at his own game didn't work, they turned to verbal abuse, hoping an offended Myers would log off and cancel his subscription. They just tried to bully him out of the community because he was such an asshole. When Twixt celebrated his victories, lobbing messages like, "Yay, heroes! Go good team! Vils lose again" in the game's chat box. Well, he's really hitting them some gamer talk. Users like Hunter Killed responded, "You're a major shitbird." Another player added, "I hope your mother gets cancer." Yet another wrote, all caps, "Everyone hates you." Myers was stunned by the reaction, since he obeyed the game's rules. And this is where you get into, like, the most infuriating part of this, because it's very clear that this dude just simply does not understand, like, I don't know, human beings. If he had taken up this social experiment to specifically be a troll and to see how people would react in an online game, that's one thing. But he seems genuinely surprised and upset by the fact that people don't appreciate his playstyle. And the argument that this is what the developers intended is really strange. It's like, how do you think this guy, like, lives in real life? Like, how do you think he lives in society? It's not like a matchmaking queue where you're specifically put into the environment with, you know, the end goal, the win condition being that you beat the other player. It's just a space where you can PvP. You're not obligated to, you're just allowed to. Does he think that just because you're allowed to do something that it's totally cool and okay, and if you, even if like there's a culture against that, well, it's legal, it's not against the law for me to be an asshole? Like, how does he apply this in his real life? The other thing that really gets me is that from my own experience with MMOs, different servers have different cultures. There are servers where they are probably way more friendly to open PvP in this area. He may have just been on one that was not accommodating to that, where people just wanted to use it as a social space. So this guy comes into a community, reads the rules, says, well, this is allowed for me to do, and despite going against community culture and accepted, like, just like etiquette in the community, he decides to break that and then acts like he's being victimized when people push against him. What an asshole. Now, the ways that people retaliated against him did go a little too far, so it does get into some things where people on message boards would say that he had been banned because he'd called a fellow player the N word with the hard R. Another post apparently claimed that he was a convicted pedophile. So, like, obviously way over the line for a video game, right? And never acceptable. So, like, yeah, there is certainly a point where it got way too far, and I'm not going to act like gamers have never gone way too hard with taking online drama offline. I do think, having said that, how interesting it is that this was not like an immediate thing that happened to him. No, this took, from what it sounds like, months of constant harassment. Like, when he got, if you go back even to the start of the article where someone said, "I will kill you in real life," that was 3 months into him doing this. Assumedly, every day, every other day. I'm not sure exactly how often he was doing it, but enough that people remembered him, and he began to build up a reputation. Imagine some dude comes into your social space and then harasses you for 3 months, and you lash out one time. He's like, "Oh my, gamers are so toxic." So the people who called him a pedophile, the article goes on to say, were banned, and people who, took it a little too far and were overly aggressive in chat did have some action taken against their accounts. And it kind of falls in line with what we've learned about toxicity in games, is that most people only offend one time. They just have a bad day and they run into fucking Twixt, they run into Myers, and they've just had it and they take their day out on him a little bit. Which, I guess, like, you shouldn't do, but if you're going to do it to anyone, this is the most infuriating part. It's right at the end. Myers likened his journey as Twixt to a bad high school experience, especially the verbal abuse and rumor mongering. Dude, I know I've, like, compared this to real life, but this is the dude, I feel like a lot of people have had an experience with this, who just comes in, is really fucking annoying, people ask him to stop nicely, and then he keeps doing it, and then someone, like, finally gets aggressive, and he has the fucking gall to act like you're in the wrong. What a bitch. He said his experience demonstrated that modern-day social groups making use of modern-day technology can revert to medieval and crude methods in trying to manipulate and control others. "If you aren't a member of the tribe, you get whacked with a stick," he said. "I look at social groups with dismay." Shut the fuck up, David Myers. You're an asshole. Hey, so guess what? I did a little more research, and I found some more details that tell another side of the story. So there's a post on Reddit from like 14 years ago from someone who was active in the City of Heroes community, and he describes Twixt's activities a little differently. So apparently there was a system in the PvP zone where there were actually computer-controlled enemies. And if you died to the computer-controlled enemies, you incurred a debuff that would cut the amount of experience you gained in half. When Myers killed people, he wasn't just killing them with his own character. He would specifically, his strategy was to teleport them from where they were when they were on low health from fighting other players, because people would actually be PvPing in this area. He would teleport them when they were at low health to PvE enemies, the computer-controlled enemies. They would die, and then they would have this they would basically, he would screw them over and force them to grind through what it was called debt. It was literally called debt. It wasn't a time debuff. You had to work it off. He was literally employing a strategy tailor-made to annoy people, ruin their fun, and waste their time. Apparently, he also really overstated his actual PvP abilities in that article and in the paper that he wrote about it. According to a lot of people, he would actually die pretty often in direct combat. It's just that his really cheap, stupid strategy of teleporting people away was how he supposedly got his kills. There's actually more that this user describes later on in the thread. So essentially, the claim that was in the article and that is in his paper that these zones were used, these PvP zones were used for socializing, was also a misrepresentation. The zones were/are not used primarily for networking. Even when they were first introduced, the zones would consist of a mix of battles, some involving upwards of 100 people to others only involving 2. Because people knew each other prior to the release of City of Villains, they would sometimes stand around and chat for short times while others fought in what were deemed Fight Club atmospheres. But this primarily only occurred in a zone Twixt did not visit. There are 4 separate PvP zones, each for a different level range. The zone where Twixt primarily resided almost purely consisted of large-scale player battles. He would teleport people from those battles to nearby groups of PvE enemies with the explicit purpose of getting the victim dead. His portrayal of the zones, the conflicts, his actions, his victims' actions, and his attitude in the entire study are oftentimes misleading and sometimes outright lies. His erroneous classification of the death threats and other extreme responses as being the norm for our community is dishonest and inappropriate. Even in the interpretation where I was generally believing what he said in that article, he still looked like an asshole. And when you learn how the game actually worked and the reality of it, he's an even bigger piece of shit. Incredible. And he has the nerve to act like this is some kind of groundbreaking, interesting research when you're just a jerk, dude. You're just a jerk and no one likes you. This reminds me of even further back when I did a video on a game called Habitat, which was one of the first MMOs. You can sort of think of it as a precursor, maybe more so to something like IMVU or what's the other one? Second Life, where it was more of a MMO social hub rather than a, like, I don't know, what we usually think of as an MMORPG. So in Habitat, it was really groundbreaking. This was in the 80s on dial-up internet, where the developers were kind of doing something that had never been done before in managing and interacting with an online community. And they wrote this great write-up, which I'll try to find and I'll link in this video, because if there's anything interesting or useful that you can get out of me ranting about this annoying-ass dude, it's I think it would be this. It's a paper called Lessons from Habitat, and some of the most, a lot of it is like technical stuff, like, whoa, 8 kilobit internet's gonna be crazy, dude. But the best age stuff that we can draw from is about the social aspect of online games and the relationship that the developers had with their players. One quote that I still remember was basically how one of the developers said that the more they tried to control the way that people played the game, the less control they had. Because players, they're just gonna do whatever they want in your game. You can attract them with a certain kind of experience, the promise of a certain kind of experience, and you can sort of incentivize them to play in certain ways, but really you have no control, especially when they massively outnumber you. So they learned that the more hands-off approach that the more hands-off their approach became, the easier it was to work with the community and actually shape the game into something that people wanted to play. Contrary to what he may think, just because a developer allows you to do something does not mean that it's going to be popular or well received. There are also a number of social lessons in here, which I think have become pretty obvious by now. Thank you for letting me get this off of my chest. I have been thinking about this for, no joke, like almost 2 years at this point. I hate this article, and I hate how it seems to side with this guy. Don't harass anyone involved in this. Go check out the City of Heroes legacy servers. I think there's like 2, Homecoming and Rebirth. Check those out. It's a cool game. Go read Lessons from Habitat. Bye.